My name is Dr. Grace Telesco. My name is Dr. Grace Telesco. My name is Dr. Grace Telesco. I'm joined by Dr. Teresa Lily White, Dr. Lenore Walker, Mr. Ed Denzel. Investigation with Dr. T is something that actually was the brainchild of our dean, Dr. Durham. And now, coming up this next season, we're going to be doing it almost weekly, a weekly show on a Thursday night. So lots of really cool guests. It's not just police topics, it's not just corrections topics, but it's topics that are affecting us in kind of all areas. But one of the things that we hope to get across is raising awareness, educating about some of these really important topics like human trafficking, topics like disasters. We did a show, Confessions of a Serial Killer. So for this upcoming season, we've got a couple of really cool things. We're going to have a day in the life of a DEA agent. Another really cool one, which is really close to my heart, is going to be on September 11th. Because not only do we want to talk about 9/11 and the work of the NYPD, but I also want to really look at the mental health outcomes. You know, we also have the human trafficking panel. We are going to bring back our Brevard Sheriff, Sheriff Wayne Ivey. It's always a pleasure to have him on. We're going to have Unfound again, Ed Denzel. He'll be coming back a few times, and that's going to be really exciting and interesting too. Welcome, everybody. Dr. Grace Telesco, Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice. We are live streaming on our YouTube channel, and welcome tonight to Investigation with Dr. T. I'm so excited about who we have tonight. Oh my goodness, this is just an amazing gift, an amazing blessing that we were able to get the Honorable Judge Catalina Avalos, who was appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis to the 17th Judicial Circuit. Prior to her appointment, she served as county court judge for Broward County. She also was a former prosecutor. We'll hear all about these amazing positions and titles that she's held over the years. Previously, she was a director at Trip Scott, PA. She earned her bachelor's degree from Florida International University. And guess where she got her Juris Doctor from? The one and only Nova Southeastern University, Shepherd College of Law. So how cool is that we have such an amazing guest? I want to also just point out that, being a judge is when you want to talk about time consuming and you want to talk about juggling your schedule, you would think that if we asked a judge who is, sitting on the 17th Circuit Court, to be on our show, to be on our program, it would not be, like out of the ordinary for the judge to say, "I'm so sorry, my calendar is really booked, way out in advance, and I can't do it." But she accommodated us instantly when we asked her. We actually met her at the Davie Police Department. We were all part of a community police academy experience for 12 weeks. And the judge was one of the guest speakers. So me and Justin, I was texting Justin while we were listening to her, and I was like, "You got to get her. You got to get her." So on a break, we all ran out to the hallway, and we didn't strong arm her by any means, but we did ask her, and she just totally graciously said yes, a resounding yes. So please help me welcome Judge Catalina Avalos, the Honorable Avalos. All rise for the judge. And I'm going to spotlight her because that's what we're doing tonight. We are spotlighting her. And what we're going to hear about tonight from the judge is she's going to share with us a little bit about the court system, a little bit about, kind of the details, the logistics, things that we may not know that you might find really fascinating to know about. And then we're going to get into how did you get involved in in law, and what attracted you to law school, and then what was it like to prosecute cases, and then what was it like to be a judge and then be appointed by the governor. All of these things are just amazing, amazing achievements. And so that's what we're going to hear all about tonight. So help me welcome Judge Avalos.
So good afternoon, Dr. T and Dustin and Layla and all of you that are here today. Thank you for having me. I'm actually, talking about schedules and crazy schedules. I am actually talking to you from Orlando, Universal Studios, because we have our matrimonial lawyers conference here, and all the judges have to come, and we get updated on all the law and all the changes that have been happening. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. And yes, I want to talk to you a little bit about the 17th. Those of you that are outside of Broward County, the 17th Judicial Circuit is one of the circuits in Florida. And we have 4 courthouses. I'm going to share the screen with you all. So give me just one moment. Sorry, I think I just had a little...
You should be able to share your screen.
Now I should. Yes. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Okay.
So let me see if you can see the screen. Why aren't...
Yes.
Can you see the screen? Yes.
Yes. Yes.
We can. Okay. Okay, so in Broward County, the 17th Judicial Circuit, and this happens across the board in most states and most counties, you have different courthouses. We have one, the main courthouse is in downtown Fort Lauderdale. Then we have the North Regional Courthouse in Deerfield and Plantation and in Hollywood. And it's good for you to know that, because depending on you can get different services. If you have to pay tickets, if you have to go look at court files, you can always go to any of these courthouses and request those services. There's also vehicle registration, passport, and the clerk's office can always assist you in that. So it's always good to know where our courthouses are located, the satellite courthouses, and our jury trials happen. If you get called for jury service, you would be going to the downtown Fort Lauderdale courthouse. Just a little bit about the breakdown about the judicial system in Florida. We have the Supreme Court that hears most of all of the appeals, but before it gets to the Supreme Court, it's either going to be in the county courts or in the circuit courts. And county courts usually hears misdemeanor cases, which means criminal cases that are up to a year in Broward County Jail, and civil cases with an amount of up to $50,000, small claims, and traffic tickets. Circuit courts hears everything else: felonies, family law cases, civil cases greater than $50,000, probate, guardianship, mental health, juvenile dependency, juvenile delinquency, and appeals in certain administrative cases and non-criminal cases. District Court of Appeals hears all the appeals from the lower courts, and then the Supreme Court hears appeals from the District Court of Appeals when they accept the jurisdiction. Florida courts are comprised of 20 judicial circuits, and we in the 17th, which is Broward County, is the second largest circuit, judicial circuit in the state of Florida. And just so you know, there are about 90 judges in the 17th Judicial Circuit. And once you leave Palm Beach County, you have a lot more counties in one circuit. But Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, and Broward are just basically one county in one circuit. We talked a little bit about the cases that are heard in circuit court. Criminal cases are those that are punishable up to death. Third-degree felonies are those that are punishable with up to 5 years in Florida State Prison. And then you have second-degree felonies and first-degree felonies. And then circuit, as we talked briefly before, covers a lot of the other civil matters and juvenile delinquency and dependency as well. And in county court, we have the landlord-tenant, so eviction cases, small claims, any legal disputes where the amount is $8,000 or less. And I don't know if you all know, but in small claims, you can represent yourself. And corporations cannot represent themselves in civil matters where the controversy is more than $8,000. And this is just some a little bit of background information for you all in case that anybody asks you, is there going to be an interpreter? A lot of times people do need interpreters. The court provides translation and interpreters services for felony probation for mostly criminal cases, and that includes the dependency and juvenile cases, child support, and domestic violence. But all other cases, including family court, people need to bring their own interpreters to the court. I don't know if any of you, and hopefully none of you, will ever get served with a lawsuit, but it's good to know just a brief information as to what happens. A case gets filed, it has to be served, an answer has to be filed. So sometimes people get a lawsuit and they're like, I don't know what to do. They don't do anything. It's not going to go away by magic. So if there is service, there should be an answer, because otherwise a default can be entered and a person can get a judgment against them without even knowing what happened, because they failed to answer the complaint. After the answer, there's usually disclosing information, what we call discovery, and then there's a decision that gets made, and it's usually by the judge or the jury, depending upon what kind of case we're talking about. And usually you have 20 days to answer a lawsuit. And generally in Florida, corporations can't represent themselves. They have to have an attorney represent them. So if you have a corporation, or you know somebody who has a corporation that has been served, it has to have an attorney. And the complaint needs to be served in order for the court to have jurisdiction over the individual. So those are some of the things that you need to know. Again, 20 days. Once the lawsuit is filed and the person is served, they have 20 days to respond, and failure to respond to the complaint will result in a default that allows the court to enter a judgment without any input from the defendant. And then that judgment can be used to collect, to garnish wages and to take additional actions. The disclosure stage, again, could be composed of written interrogatories, requests for production, depositions, and mediation can also be ordered around this stage. And that's kind of like the anatomy of the case, how a case starts, at least a civil case, and then a final decision is either made by pretrial disposition, by settlement, by trial, by judge, or by jury. And a criminal case, as you all know, starts with the police officer making a police report being presented to the state attorney's office, and the state attorney's office making a filing decision. So it's two little bit of a different tracks, but the idea is the same. Then notice is given to the defendant, and there's this discovery where information is exchanged, and then it goes to trial. So just wanted to give you a little brief overview about the different type of cases that we hear in the courts. And certainly you could always visit 17thflcourts.org or browardcourts.org and the Florida Bar for additional information. So know that now that we had a bit of a information on our court systems, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about what I've been assigned to, which is I've been in the domestic violence misdemeanor court. I've been in the domestic violence felony court. And I can tell you that most of the cases in domestic violence, or at least a good 50 to 60% of those cases, start because somebody looks at somebody else's cell phone and they don't like what they see, and then a fight ensues between the couple. Although domestic violence could also be between parents and siblings, anybody that lives together or has a child together. I've also been assigned to review and sign domestic violence civil petitions. And now currently I am in the family division, presiding over divorces, over paternity actions, child support, alimony, paternity, time sharing, and all sorts of different issues, which is what brought me to this conference here in Orlando to get some updates on the law. And Dr. T, I know you had some questions, so certainly I don't want to monopolize all the time and start talking about the different things without giving an opportunity for you to ask the questions.
Thank you. Well, that's you can't. There's nothing that you're going to say that I wouldn't want to hear, and that everybody would want to hear. So I guess I want to start with maybe we could start right where you just left off with domestic violence, and maybe your impressions of justice in this area, and just what your take on it is, in terms of how true the allegations are, um, what kinds of allegations are there, and then do you feel justice, is served for the victim, for the defendant, and for everyone involved? What's your just general, opinion on it?
Sure, and it's a really good question, because when I first took over the domestic violence division, we all have our preconceived ideas, right? I mean, clearly as a judge, I come in and I have an open mind and I hear from both sides before I make any decision. But I came to the division thinking, okay, domestic violence, generally it's going to be the man, right? The male on a female. And to a big surprise, it's still predominantly male over female, but it's not, I would say probably 50-50. It's not all, or 60-40, something like that. I was surprised to see of the amount of women that are also accused of domestic violence. Now, if you listen to the public defender or the attorney, sometimes they'll say, well, the female was the real victim in the case, and it's just the charges were turned around. The defendant's smarter, has more resources, or the husband is smarter, has more resources. But when you then start listening to it, you kind of question, well, maybe it was the female who was the aggressor on that in that instance. It's really interesting. When I was in the county court division, out of 20 trials, 19 of those and these are jury trials. So this is a jury of our peers, right, that are selected by the attorneys to try the case between the state and the defense. Remember, in selecting a jury, we're looking for a fair and impartial jury. There's a voir dire. What does voir dire mean? Speak the truth. The jurors get asked all these questions, whether they can be fair and impartial, their stories, their own experiences with either domestic violence or with being a victim of any crime. And 19 out of 20 trials were not guilty.
Wow.
Now, this was in the misdemeanor division, so most of the charges were battery. What is a battery? It's an unlawful touching against somebody's will. So it could be anywhere that doesn't cause serious bodily injury, or that it's not enhanced by virtue of an action. For example, a battery on a pregnant female, the penalties are now enhanced because of
Sure.
the pregnant. Battery on a person over 60 years old, it's enhanced because it's on an older person.
I'm glad you didn't say elderly just now. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that.
You don't look 60. You don't look, you don't look 60 at all.
64.
So, it's interesting because out of it, some of the cases were a push, some of the cases were more serious, where there was bruising, where there were witnesses, and I don't know if the jury, at least in our county and the 17th Judicial Circuit, had difficulty finding somebody guilty, right? Because at the end of the day, what does a jury do? A jury has to determine whether or not the state proved the allegations against the defendant beyond a reasonable doubt. The allegations in a battery were, did the defendant commit the crime, and was the defendant the person who actually committed it? And the crime being unlawful touching against the person's will. So I don't know if it's jury nullification, if the jury just didn't want to give somebody, a lot of times on misdemeanors you have, and that's another thing, DV cases, domestic violence cases, they don't discriminate. It's across the board. It's, again, across the board on racial grounds. It's across the board on financial status of individuals. So it really doesn't, it doesn't exist in one group of people more than another. Because it does not discriminate. So it was very interesting to see that. On the felony cases, now we saw a lot more cases with involving firearms, involving knives, involving injury, involving
Serious injury?
Serious injury, yeah. Sometimes a broken nose, a broken arm, sometimes stabbings, sometimes shootings. So it certainly does escalate. And it wasn't surprising to see that some of the individuals accused of these more aggravated charges had prior involvement with
Interesting.
the law.
Yeah.
And the
It-
other thing, go ahead.
no, no. After you finish.
The other thing that surprised me in the amount of cases when I read the probable cause affidavits was, it all started with the partner picked up the phone, looked at the partner's text messages, looked at emails, looked at correspondence, and saw something that they didn't like. And there was also domestic violence amongst the gay community. It's also amongst the gay community, siblings, and also the parents, children on parents, on the elderly who seem to be frail.
Yeah.
That I saw quite a bit
Like grandparents raising children like that.
some grandparents raising children, and some parents raising, that have raised children, and now the parents are, let's say they're disabled in their home, or the children who are no longer children, under 18, they're just adults that perhaps live together, get into fights and result in domestic violence. So
Yeah.
it's sad that we have to have a court designated just for domestic violence. It's I think it says a lot about our society, but it's also good that we are able as a court system to give special attention to these cases, because you have to take these cases seriously. It impacts the family, it impacts the children, and one never knows when one case, even though it starts as a misdemeanor, could result in more serious charges or
Is
in
there,
lack of safety.
yeah. Is there a domestic violence like advocate or domestic
That,
violence advocacy office or something like that out of the
that's a really good
courthouse?
question. Yes. In fact, when the state attorney's office has a victim advocate unit. So when there is a domestic violence case, so let me back up a moment. When there's a domestic violence case and the defendant gets arrested, he gets seen by a magistrate. In Florida, everybody who gets arrested, we try to see them or make sure a judge sees them within the next 24 hours. That's what we call a first appearance hearing. And there are few offenses in Florida where you get arrested and you can post a bond there'll be a bond set without the need to see a judge. Domestic violence is not one of them. You have to see the judge before you can get released. In the first appearance, we try to see them within 24 hours. As soon as that arrest takes place, the state attorney's office gets notified, and then the state attorney's office tries to make contact with the victim. Their victim advocate unit tries to make contact with the victim, and those victim advocates are always in the courtroom. They come to court every day. They're there. They support the victims, and they're there to assist and to make sure that the victims have all of the information and they have the resources. Now, something that's interesting and can be a little bit frustrating from the court's perspective is that you have the alleged victims who come to court, and despite sometimes very serious allegations, they're like, but judge, I want to go back. And you're like, well, are you in fear for your, there's a colloquy, a set of questions that we ask. Are you in fear for your safety? Have you been a victim of domestic violence in the past? Have you been a victim? Have you had to call the police for something that happened in the past? You try to get all these answers. And sometimes the answer is, yes, I've been a victim of domestic violence in the past. Yes, this has happened a number of times, but I'm not scared of him. He's going to change, or
Not
she's
yet.
going to change, right?
Right.
And that sometimes you have to weigh very heavily, because as a judge, you have the person here in front of you asking, judge, I want to go back to live with them. And we all know that sometimes the alleged victim is financially dependent on the individual. is the person, the aggressors, the person who pays the bills, is the person that assists. Sometimes there's a number of children. The other spouse, the alleged victim doesn't work, doesn't have the resources available. And then sometimes you see that there's allegations made that you question whether they're real allegations, because then you find out, there's a divorce and there could be leverage, that it could be used as
Custody
leverage,
cases.
or there could be
Yes.
something else. They're tired of having them at home, and they know that if they file a domestic violence case or an allegation, then there's going to be a no contact order, which doesn't allow that person, the alleged victim, to come home. So I think it's very important to have an open mind. Anytime you have, every case is on a case by case basis. You have to look at the facts. We have to look at everything very carefully to try to understand what's really going on in the home environment, right? In that relationship environment, to make the right decision.
And we also know that the empirical data shows that the victim will have tried to leave and return an average of 7 times,
That is correct.
which is like, mind-boggling, right? You say, well, I don't understand why someone would continue to, go back, and all the reasons that you just now said, and then some. We have distinguished Professor Emeritus Dr. Lenore Walker at NSU in the College of Psychology, and she's written tons on this learned helplessness. It's actually, a phenomenon which I'm sure you know and understand.
Interesting you bring up Dr. Walker, because when I was an assistant state attorney, I tried a second degree murder case where Dr. Walker she was the expert for the defense on the battered spouse. We were the
Yes.
prosecutors, and she claimed that the defendant, who was the female in that relationship, was actually the victim, and she suffered from it was a battered spouse syndrome and the cycle of violence, and explained the cycle of violence. And the jury acquitted the lady.
Wow. I think that she talked about that. I'm not sure. I have to ask Justin and Layla. But when we had Dr. Walker on the show, I think she may have talked about that specific case. But that's very interesting. I want to bring up something to you. Back in the day, I don't know if I told you this or not. I don't know if you know this or not, but I spent 20 years in the NYPD, and I retired at the rank of lieutenant. And I worked as a young cop, sergeant, and then even a little bit as a lieutenant in Brooklyn, New York, in some of the really hot neighborhoods, right? In the hot precincts. And in Brooklyn, the district attorney had a rule about domestic violence misdemeanors, that it was a threshold. So in order for it to be considered a felony, this is going to blow your mind. I mean, I think it's going to blow your mind. And we're talking now, I'm thinking like the late 80s, early 90s. And the threshold was 36 stitches.
Wow.
It blew your mind. It
It
blew
sure
your mind.
does.
Yeah. I mean, so what, as a judge, does that tell you? And you were also a former prosecutor, so there was reasoning and rationale behind this threshold. And it clearly meant that there were so many felony assaults that were so incredibly serious physical injury with deadly weapons, that they couldn't try all those cases. And so there was this demarcation of like, okay, 36 stitches and under is misdemeanor, and above that is felony.
Wow.
What do you think about that? What's your
Here's what I'm going to say. I think that fortunately, the law has addressed that, I think, and the law has addressed that by virtue of making the statutes and making what the requirements are for the misdemeanors and what the requirements are for the felonies, so that perhaps it didn't become it didn't become one person's decision, but we have the separation of powers, and the legislators make the laws that we're going to follow. So that is quite a steep threshold, though, if you think about it, to make it a felony, because sometimes you don't need 36 stitches, right, to make it a serious bodily injury, or to make it a real threat that the next time it may be a murder, right? Or
Absolutely.
it may be a terrible injury that the person may not recover from. So
Absolutely.
in that sense. But I will say this, the state attorney's office here has and when I say the state attorney's office, I want to be clear that the credit really goes to the whole system, system as a whole. I mean, it's just that the state attorney's office, because remember that the state attorney's office is the one who charges, right? They make the ultimate filing decision. So I would often tell the victim, ma'am, you want the charge dropped. You're asking me to drop it. The court doesn't have jurisdiction. The public defender's office or your defense attorney doesn't have the ability to do that. I don't have the ability to just dismiss it without there being legal grounds for a dismissal.
Right.
The state brings the charges, the state dismisses the charges, or the state chooses not to file them, right? For whatever
Right.
reason, maybe after they meet with the victim. But they do have something called a misdemeanor diversion program, for domestic violence. In misdemeanors, not in felony. And that is if there is no criminal background and the victim is in agreement, the person can go ahead and enter into the program, which consists of 12 months probation, up to 12 months supervision, right? We don't call it probation because they're not under probation per se, but up to six to 12 months supervision, a 29-week batter's intervention program, which is mandatory by the statute. And then if the person, and generally it includes no contact with the victim. And if the person, if the defendant complies with all of those requirements, the state then will no pros the case at the end.
You know, there's another thing about New York. You know, us New Yorkers, we always have to compare everything. We compare pizza in Florida to New York and Chinese food and all of that. But I also wanted to, if we talk about for a minute, the batterers intervention program, um, there were an awful lot of NYPD officers who were getting in trouble with domestic violence allegations and having their guns taken from them and being placed on modified assignment. So there was this special batterers intervention program that they had for police only. Um, do you find that to be the case in Florida and Broward County specifically? Or
I,
is it few and far between?
I would say it's few and far between. I can tell you that in the 2 years that I was presiding over domestic violence cases, I had one instance where the defendant was a police officer. That they came in front of me to be able to release. He wasn't suspended from his job. It was a misdemeanor allegation. It wasn't against the spouse. It was against the stepson, teenager stepson. And they asked me to release the firearm so that he could work and leave it at the station. So he could only have his firearm for work-related purposes, and they weren't living in the home together. So, there was a motion filed, and I went ahead and granted it on those, with that supervision, having the department on board. And I mean, a lot of work went into it. I say that I granted it, but, there was a lot of background, I guess, safety steps that went into it.
Right, right. So here you are, you graduate from NSU Law School, and your very first job is what? What happens after that?
So my very first job was working in I did a CLI, which is a clinic at Nova, with the state attorney's office. And that's not a job, but, it was an internship. And I got to try cases as a student, which is a fabulous, it's just a fabulous thing to do. And it's a horrible thing because then you don't want to go back to school. You just want to go and be in the courtroom and be practicing law, right? But you still have to go and get your bar exam and everything else. But I went to a civil firm for a short period of time. I had clerked with them and they hired me, but I had that bug that I wanted to go back to the state attorney's office because I loved the courtroom. And a position became available, so I left the firm and I went and became an assistant state attorney, and I worked in a whole bunch of different divisions, including I left when I was in the 1020 life unit. 1020 life means firearms. In Florida, if you use a firearm, depending on how you use the firearm, you could have minimum mandatories of 10 years, 20 years, or life in prison. So I ended up that was my last division where I was assigned, but I did anywhere from sex crimes in the juvenile division, county court. I was the chief, deputy chief of the county court division, and then just tried a whole slew, of jury trials, which I really liked. And that's kind of where that desire to be a judge was reinforced. My uncle was a lawyer in Colombia, in South America. He unfortunately was murdered by some of the forces, the guerrilla forces over there. He was
Sorry.
handling a case, but he used to talk to me about the law. I used to be able to go and hear him argue certain cases. So that's kind of where the love for the law started. But then the love for the courtroom and thinking, I could do this job of a judge. I could do this. I've been doing it. I've been in court every day. I see what the judges do. I think I can do that. I can keep an open mind. I can certainly follow the law. And that's where I just started getting that bug and wanted to do it and started trying to figure out, so how do I do this? How do my parents weren't lawyers. They weren't in the field, I didn't really have the connections, but I will say Nova is, if you want to stay in South Florida, Nova is a fabulous place to be. And really anywhere. We have alumni. I am lucky enough to be part of the board of governors for the law school. So I get a lot of information as to where our alumni are and the great things our alumni are doing and the amount of judges that we have that come from Nova. So having gone to Nova Law opened a lot of doors for me here locally. And frankly, I wasn't going anywhere. I got married pretty young. I had my kids. My parents lived here. My brothers lived here. So I didn't think of going to practice somewhere else. And I just started at the state attorney's office, started seeing and just started, finding out, what do I need to do to be a judge? How does one become a judge in Florida? There are two ways. You can either be elected or you can be appointed, So I started trying to, and everybody, when I was young, would just tell me, you know what, that'll come in due time. Just do your job, be a good lawyer, make sure you maintain a good reputation, be true to your word. There's not one case that it's worth your reputation.
Right.
It takes you years. It takes years to build a reputation. It takes a moment to destroy. So I think I got some pretty good advice, some pretty good mentors that also came from Nova, that were just willing to help. And I guess they saw something in me that I had a desire to do something, but I didn't know that I could actually get it done. And, I always think of that the Nike logo, just do it. If you want to do it, just do it. Don't see obstacles, see opportunities.
Don't see the LSAT as an obstacle, right? Do you have any suggestions about that for some of our students who are
I
about
do.
to take them?
Absolutely. And let me back up a second. I told you that I was born in Colombia, or my uncle in Colombia got murdered, right? But I was born in Colombia. I came here when I was about in sixth grade to South Florida. I didn't speak very good English, and I would get my papers with all the red markings in the world, and I would tell my teachers, "Well, I want to be a lawyer," and some of them would say, "Well, it's not going to happen." Because I had an accent, it was difficult, it was something I had to overcome. But again, just do it. You want something, you keep it in the focus, you have to work for it. Nothing's going to be handed to you. And look, LSAT's a test. I was a horrible test taker. But there are courses, there's sometimes they're expensive, but if you look, there might be some scholarship for it. I worked two jobs to be able to pay for my course, and I did, and I was fortunate enough to get into a few schools. I picked Nova because I was here. So I would say that take the LSAT serious. It's not something that you can just show up and take, because it's not something that we really learn in school. There's like logic, there's questions about reading comprehension, there's which we do learn in school, but you have to practice, but then there's also logic questions that's not something that we generally are familiar with. And I always think of in my mind, I always think of these standardized tests, whether it's the LSAT, whether it's the bar exam, whether it's the SATs, I always think of them almost as a game. You have to learn how to play the game. You
Mm.
have to, you know what, when we, I don't want to date myself because I know there's a lot of video games, but I was going to say like Miss Pac-Man, I'm sure no, that's an old video game, but my point being is to get good at it, you have to practice. You got to know where the rewards are. You got to
Right.
understand how the questions are. And that's the same for the bar exam. You got to learn the tests. You got to learn what they're asking you. And it can be done. I mean, for a person who didn't speak the language, for who was not a good test taker, I took the LSAT ones, I took the the bar ones, and fortunately it all worked out.
Wow.
But it took a lot of work. I took it as a full-time job. I knew that I had obstacles ahead of me, and and I just did it. And for those of you who think, well, it's easy for you to say, but let me tell you, I had a child when I took I got married at 21. I was pretty young. By 23, I had my first daughter. It was my first semester of law school. And then by the bar, I
Wow.
had a daughter, so I had to take care of my daughter. I had to study for the bar. And again, what do you want to do? If you want to do it, just do it. Don't look at obstacles,
Yeah,
look at opportunities and
that's
figure a
right.
way to do it.
Absolutely. That's really remarkable. Thank you for sharing that story. And it's very encouraging, and it could be applicable to any student, whether they're going to go into law school or they're looking to go into graduate school. Some of our
Sure.
students are already in our PhD in criminal justice program. And, it's daunting. It's daunting. The coursework is daunting, but then after that, the dissertation is daunting. So no matter how you slice it, whether it's a standardized test, whether it's a dissertation, you have to put this, like you said, there's the goal, set your bar, no pun intended, and move toward it, no matter what, no matter what. So thank you for sharing that with us.
No, absolutely. And yeah, it's not, I sometimes we've gotten used to this participation trophy idea, that everybody gets a trophy because we're in little league. It's not
Yes.
like that anymore. You get to a point in life where you really have to put in the work in order to reap the
Yeah.
benefits. But the
Well,
benefits
yeah.
are wonderful.
I think that's this is a topic for another program, but I think that's a very big disservice we're doing to our young people. Maybe I'm dating myself, but there is such a thing as first place, second place, third place. Like there really is such a thing as that. And in life, there's some things that are super competitive. Like there's internships that right now that a lot of students are trying to get. Well, not everybody who applies gets it. And it doesn't even matter that you had your application in first. Like there's other factors that go into it to make that determination on whether or not you deserve it or not. So that's real life. I don't think that we're preparing our young people for real life. Real.
And you said something about an application, and it's so important to make sure that application doesn't have misspelled words, is complete, all the boxes are checked in, all the attachments that are asked. I mean, I've sat on numerous scholarship committees for Nova students as well, for different organizations that I participate in. And sometimes we get an application and I'm thinking, how is this person in college? Like we can't even check the boxes and provide answer the prompt of the essay that's being asked. I mean, somebody's trying to give you money. Spend a little bit more time, make sure you proofread, make sure you're submitting the information that's requested of you. Because even that's important.
Yeah. And even when you're going to go for an interview, the person in-person interview, practice that, role play that with somebody. I just finished doing some scholarship interviews. And it's just so amazing. You might have two students, right? One student is really good public speaker, personable, giving you good eye contact, really giving you some critical thinking responses. It's just great. Awesome. And then you have the other candidate who is just like one word answer, looking down, not looking at you, dressed not to impress. And it's just like, did you really prepare for this interview? Like, do you really want it? Am I like bothering you? Am I, interrupting your nap or what? It's just like, if you want something, you have to, 100% of you has to be behind that and be fueled by the motivation of the goal.
And you brought something else up that I think it's, I'm probably going to be criticized for what I'm going to say, but we all want to be our individual, right? Everybody talks about individuality, and I think that's wonderful. But sometimes when it comes to for purposes of a job interview in certain careers and certain professions, right, there are some expectations. There are expectations that you appear professional, that you appear groomed, with the proper attire. In professional attire. And you know what? Once you're in the field a little bit, then you can exercise your individuality because you've already earned your seat there and your position there. But when you're trying to get it, you kind of have to fit in that box that sometimes we're, especially young people, sometimes are reluctant to. But it's just kind of the price that you have to pay to get in, and then you're there, and then you can, do your thing, be you.
Exactly. Then you can be you. Right. Exactly. To a point.
Right,
But
sure. I mean, you
yeah,
always want to be you. You always want to do you, and you always want to be you, but you also have to
yes,
be respectful of the profession that you're trying to get into and
exactly.
understand how it works so that you can get a seat at the table.
So what was the vetting like for you with Governor DeSantis appointing you? That didn't just happen overnight. Like, remember the Ed McMahon who used to come knocking on the door and give you the that's before your time. But anyway, I'm sure that didn't happen like that. I'm sure that this was a process and a half.
It is a process and a half that goes back to high school. It's a huge application. It is probably, my application was probably like this thick. They ask you all sorts of questions. They want to know where you went to school, what cases you've tried, the lawyers you're in front of, the lawyers you've been litigating against, litigating with. They call all sorts of people in the community to ask about you, about your qualifications, about your temperament, about your reputation. And they ask prior employers from 20 years ago. I mean, I had people from 20 years ago call me and say, "Hey, I just got a call vetting you." And so it is a pretty extensive process. I even had, because I was born in Colombia, I even got this letter saying I had to give them permission to go to Interpol and ask for my, I guess, my criminal background, or if I had any type of criminal background. But also, it's a vetting process in terms of legal knowledge, because you have to go through a judicial nominating commission who comes and asks you questions, and they ask you some substantive questions, and then you have to interview with people from the governor's general counsel's office also asking you questions and legal questions. Questions like, how do you interpret a statute? How do you look at it? What would you do? Making sure that you're going to follow the law. If you're a county court judge or a circuit court judge, you still have to follow what the Fourth District Court of Appeals says, or the Supreme Court says, because, we have separation of powers. Just because I wear a black robe doesn't mean I get to change what the legislature has done and said that we have to do. So there's a lot of questioning, there's a lot of studying. Sometimes I felt like I was back in law school trying to, just remember some basic concepts that we don't do every day, that I didn't do every day. And there were probably 20 something people that applied, and there were 2 seats available, and I was fortunate enough to get one of the seats.
That's great. That's
So
great. Congratulations.
thank you.
That's such
It's
an
exciting. I will tell you, it's I'll never forget that phone call when I got the phone call and said, the governor has decided to appoint you, and
wow.
it's a pretty wow feeling. It's a
So
pretty
you go up to Tallahassee for the swearing in?
we no the swearing in was here. We go up to Tallahassee for an interview,
Okay.
for the
So
interview before the selection.
did you get to meet the governor?
I did not. No, I met with his legal team and the people who they select to do the interviews. So I don't know him, but I thank him for appointing me. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. And what
Yeah.
about, isn't it true that once you pass the bar and then you become licensed in that state, and you could take the bar in several states to be licensed in several states, isn't that true?
So once you get your law degree, you can really determine where you want to take the bar. You can take the bar in any state that you want. There are states, however, that offer reciprocity,
Okay.
which if you take the bar here, so long as you pay a fee, and you do it within certain amount of time of passing the bar here in Florida or in another state, then you can apply for reciprocity in another state. So like, for example, the Washington DC bar, I think, has reciprocity with a lot of the states, but Florida does not have reciprocity with a lot of states because a lot of people want to come down here. So
Right.
that was my understanding back then. I really haven't looked into it
Yeah.
much, but I can tell you, for example, my brother, he studied in North Carolina. He became a lawyer there, and he ended up coming here for a little while, took the bar here, and then ended up going back. But yeah, you can sit up for the bar anywhere you want as long as you get your degree from an accredited law school.
Right. Is there a special kind of position or status for you as a lawyer to argue a case before the Supreme Court? Is there some kind of special like certification, credentialing, qualification? What is
So,
that process?
yeah, so to argue in front of the Supreme Court, you have to get approved to argue. You have to be able to you get approved to argue before the Supreme Court, the same as if you want to argue before the United States District Court of Appeals. Like if you want to go to the United States District Court of Appeals, there used to be an actual written test. Now you just have to fill out some paperwork that you have some and be able to prove that you have the credentials to do that. To argue before the District Court of Appeals, before the Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court.
So my final question, because we're coming to the hour where we like to open it up for if there are any questions in the chat, either in the webinar chat or in the YouTube chat. And so the question is a very general one. We hear a lot in criminal justice classes, in criminal justice blogs, articles, even on in the media, that justice is a revolving door, and that there's very little justice in criminal justice, and that there's a giant need for reform. What is your just general assessment of justice in America?
I mean, I guess I would need to understand what what is meant by revolving doors. It mean that defendants keep coming through the system
Yes.
and
Well, recidivism, like, so when you think
recidivism.
about recidivism, it's something like close to 70% will at some point become rearrested and be brought back into the system somehow. Of course, there's a lot of factors there, parole violations, maybe not committing the same crime, but committing a different crime. And there's a whole host of things, but close to 70% is pretty much the empirical data that is really not disputed. So 70% isn't good. That's not good. So something's wrong with the system that and there could be many reasons why recidivism is so high.
I think something that comes to mind is that we need to do more about identifying mental health issues. And mental health is not, and I want to be clear in what I'm saying. I'm not suggesting that mental health is an excuse, but what I'm suggesting or what I'm saying is that we need to be able to identify mental health issues at an earlier stage to hopefully address some of these, to address or help cut some of that recidivism. Now, there are I think some individuals that are just going to be there's going to be recidivism no matter what you do, because that's just unfortunately, that's just what happens. There's the drug abuse, there is substance abuse, there's
I'm so glad you're bringing that up.
mental health.
Right. So you got the mental health piece, which is it's intense, it's serious. I mean, there are people who are getting arrested for breaking into a residence when there's major schizophrenia, not on their medication, and all of that, right? And so the motivation wasn't really to break in to steal something. Maybe the motivation was they were seeing things, they thought they lived there. I don't know, whatever. But the other factor you bring up is drugs and narcotics use, substance abuse, especially Broward County. Right? Are you seeing that a lot of addiction?
I see a lot of, especially both in really in felony and I mean, you see a lot of mental health issues, substance abuse issues. And, when you say it's an open door, I mean, I don't know what the solution to that is. I don't, I certainly think that at least from the criminal justice perspective, from the judges that are working it, from the mental health counselors that are there, we do try to listen to each case on a case by case basis. I mean, and try to see but we can't fix, Judge Sideway, may he rest in peace, was one of the judges that I used to appear in front of many years ago when I was a baby prosecutor. And he used to say, the criminal justice system can't fix a problem that's been going on for 20 years in a matter
Right.
of, 5 hearings. It just doesn't happen.
Exactly.
And the courts are bound by the statutes. The courts are bound by the criminal punishment, by the code. What are the guidelines, the criminal punishment guidelines? That's
Right.
the court can do. There are maximums, there are minimums, and also, the juries. I mean, there are cases that go to trial with some of the individuals that are that are coming through that revolving door. And sometimes they get convicted and sometimes they don't, or sometimes they'll get convicted of a lesser crime. So our system works the way it's intended, but I think that we need to start paying a little bit more attention to what services can be really provided, because there's really an issue of resources and funding for mental health, for substance abuse. And in Broward County, I'm very happy to say that we have a mental health court.
Yes.
We have a mental health court. We have a drug court. We even have a human trafficking court, so they do try to identify these specialty courts, but
Yeah.
even then the need is so big and the resources are still
So small. Yeah.
still limited.
And I was teaching an introduction to criminal justice class, and I brought my students, about 22 of them, to the courthouse. So we were able to get a tour, and you weren't there that day, I think, because we asked for you. We wanted to surprise you and say
I
hello.
would have loved to have seen
I
you
know.
all.
Yeah, I don't think that you were there that particular day. But we
Well, let
did.
me know next time so I make sure I'm there when you
Oh,
go.
absolutely. Next time, Justin and Layla, please make a note. So we'll be contacting the judge so that we could go when she's there, and do a tour. We also got to see Judge Porth, and he's going to be
Yes,
on. So he's going to be on the program in a few weeks, I think.
and he's a Nova grad too, I think, Judge Porth.
Absolutely. That's why I
So
think everybody's saying yes. And Melinda, do you know Melinda? Is it
Melinda
Bloss?
Block. So I worked with Judge Porth at the state attorney's office, and I worked with Melinda because Melinda Blostein used to be the PD, the public defender, when I was a baby prosecutor. So yes, it's a small world. That's another
Yes.
thing.
Yeah,
Your reputation, you got to be careful because these people are going to be around you.
that's right.
People that you go to school with, you're going to see them throughout your life.
Yeah, that's right. I'm so glad you said reputation, because that reminded me that I wanted to also put out to, from your perspective, because sometimes I'm old school. And when I say these things to my students, maybe they just like, that's not the way it is today. But what's your opinion on social media and posting on social media? You mentioned the vetting process and how far back they went and looked. And there are some times where there are some real questionable media posts, social media posts, and those can come back and haunt you down the road, right? I mean, do you have any kind of insight,
So
guidance
yeah,
for our young students?
And by the way, I have a 25-year-old and a 29-year-old,
Oh my God.
so I
Yeah.
get it from them. Mom, you just don't know what you're talking about. Everybody posts.
Yeah.
And let me tell you something. I think you need to be careful. I think the idea that it's not there or that because you erased it from your phone, it cannot be retrieved. I can't tell you how many cases while I was a partner at Tripp Scott doing civil litigation and employment litigation, how many times we had phones had been forensically computers, phones, emails, WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, and maybe it's hard. You hear it's hard, but there are experts out there that can retrieve everything, and the posts are going to come out, and they come out, and they can really harm your reputation. And look, you don't have a right to go work somewhere. I mean, an employer can deny you employment as long as it's not because you're in a protected class or because they're discriminating against you for some reason. But they can go into your social media, and if there's something they don't like, they don't have to hire you, and
That's right.
you may never even know that they did that.
Yeah.
Um, Not only that, you also remember your peers are going to be involved in you're all going to school for the same thing. Your peers are going to be in positions where they may have an input as to whether or not you get hired. They get to see your posts. So you have to be careful. And I feel bad when we were growing up, nothing was on social media. Now everything's on social media, who you're
Yeah.
with, what you're doing, what
That's
you're
right.
eating for
Yeah.
crying out loud.
That's right.
Um, and bad words. I mean, people are you just have to be careful because they will look at it. I can tell you that when I applied for judge, they asked me for all of my social media accounts under my name or any other name that I may use. And so it's there, it's permanent, and whoever tells you otherwise it's not
That's
telling you
right.
the truth. And somebody, who doesn't like you or just wants to be mean can take a screenshot of a post that you posted that you then regret and take down, but that somebody else can have that screenshot of it.
Right. And even your political views, you have to be, as a judge, you have to be impartial, right? And so
Absolutely.
you want to be careful. And I'm not just saying that to our students who want to aspire to be a judge, but our students who want to aspire to be anything. We get on social media, and then we all of a sudden think that we're, journalists, and we're going to be making all of these political statements. Just be careful what you're writing, because at some point that may come back and haunt you in a vetting process or in an interview, or you really want this job and you're not going to get it now because.
Or you have a private business. You decided to to offer a service. You go to school, you open your own business, whatever service may be, and then you are going to rely on clients. You're going to rely on consumers. Guess what? Those consumers have different points of view. They have different political views. They may agree with some things 60% of the time, but have different views. So why alienate consumers? I mean, look, that you can exercise your political views anytime you want when you go to that voting booth. There, you do what you want. And look, everybody has, yes, it is true. We have our First Amendment right to say what we want. But you need to understand that if you are going to engage in this professional world, you don't want to alienate people and engage in fights that really are um, you have to question whether they're worth picking, because at the end of the day, if you have an issue with the law, write your legislator, address it with them who can actually change it or do something about it. But
Become a
just
legislator.
or become a legislator. Exactly.
Right.
Get involved in the process that's going to make a
Exactly.
difference. But getting into a fight back and forth with 20 people on the internet, I'm not sure what that's going to do.
Exactly. Except come back to haunt you someday.
Correct.
So, Your Honor, thank you so much for all of your insight, all of your guidance tonight, all of your mentorship, even if it's virtual mentorship. Believe me, the students that are watching this and will watch it, because it's archived, really, you gave such pearls of wisdom tonight. Thank you so much. And my dean just texted me, Dean Durham, Kimberly Durham, and she was just really over the moon for you. So. Thank you again for saying yes. And we'll take some questions now, but I'm not sure if we have any, but we definitely have something to say from Justin and from Layla. So I'm going to just ask the two of them to please come on. And these are our criminal justice majors, besides the fact that they work for me in a federal work study capacity, and they're our production team. They also are criminal justice majors, and they are both members of Alpha Phi Sigma, which is our honor society, and Criminal Justice Honor Society, Omega Tau. In fact, Layla is vice president. Justin, do you have an office with the chapter? Are you an officer?
No, no, I am just a member.
But you're not just a member. You're a
I
very
still actively
you're
participate a lot, like I'm an officer, but
you
I'm
are extremely active member. So, do you have any questions, Justin, for the judge? And Layla, you'll be next.
yes. So my question was actually, what are some of the most challenging aspects of being a judge in the current legal system? So like from when you started first to now, like over the years, how has it changed? Sorry.
So, in terms of the criminal justice system, from being like a baby prosecutor to now seeing how things are, I think what has changed, if I have to say, is funny that we were talking about it, social media, the impact of social media on criminal cases. You know, that's one of the things. When I was a young attorney, social media wasn't really part of the cases or how you tried the cases. But now there's always text messages, emails, and trying to authenticate those documents and trying to authenticate text messages and things like that. That has changed a lot because everybody now has a phone, everybody has a video, everybody wants to preserve that and bring it in.
And I also wanted to say, like, how do you think it changed over the course of COVID-19? Like, do you think the criminal justice system benefited, like, by having Zoom meetings, things like that, or do you think it made things worse?
So I certainly think that there was a delay in getting a lot of cases heard in criminal cases. But I have to say that the 17th Judicial Circuit and a lot of circuits around Florida and the nation, quite frankly, were pretty proactive. I mean, Zoom, we're here on a Zoom call, and it's really I think Zoom wouldn't have taken off the way it has had it not been for COVID. So I guess we have to look at the silver lining, and it's always good to find something positive out of something so negative. But yeah, Zoom is here to stay. We still use it in court. It certainly helps, people who, at least in my courtroom, for example, in domestic violence, whether it's the victims or the defendants, unless it was trial or an evidentiary hearing, I would let them appear via Zoom because a lot of these people are working on they work, minimum wage. They work on an hourly basis. If they miss work, they're not getting paid. They have to feed their children. They have to pay their rent. So it makes it easier. It's easier to be on Zoom and still do your job if you can, and then take those 10 minutes to do the hearing or half an hour to do the hearing as opposed to leaving work, driving, traffic, parking, walking to the courthouse, going upstairs, waiting for your case to be called. So there's certainly some advantages, and then there's disadvantages. It's frustrating when the technology doesn't work. When the people show up on Zoom in their pajamas or still in bed. So all of that, yes,
Great.
that's been a good change, I guess.
Anything else, Justin, or you're going to pass it now to
I'm
Layla?
gonna pass it down to Layla. Thank you so much.
All right,
No,
great.
thank you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you for
Thanks,
having me.
Justin.
I really enjoyed being here, and I will always try to say yes, Dr. T, if I can, if
Thank
my
you.
schedule permits it, especially to be with the students and share some insight with the students.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead, Layla. Ask your question, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Okay. Overall, great presentation, Judge. Like I really, really enjoyed it. I think for me, coming from like a student perspective, when you first talked about like going into your clinic, like your first internship, how did you handle that? Like having your being in the career field that you wanted and like going into the internship.
Part of it is just taking a chance, like believing that you can do it, even when you wonder, when your knees are buckling, when your tummy is, when your tummy's scared and you're nervous and you have anxiety and you're like, can I do this? But you just have to, other people do it, why can't you? You know, if you can do it, why can't I? Or if I can do it, why can't you? And understanding that it just, if it's something that you want, then it's worth putting the work in. And there's been moments in my life that have been humbling, you know, because maybe I thought I was right and I was wrong, or maybe, you know, I went to a competition and I thought I was going to do good and I didn't do so good, you know. There's a lot of times like that in our life. We learn that from sports too. We lose, we win, but also, I don't remember exactly the number, but I always, I think it's Michael Jordan, how many shots did he fail before he actually, you know, succeeded and got good at it? And I think we just need to keep, you need to work hard. You need to understand that not every day is going to be a good day, but even from falling down, we learn how to get up, you know, even from losing, even from tough moments, we learn how to improve on that and how to turn those into opportunities. So if you have a dream, pursue it. If you think it's hard, talk to the people who have done it, get some insight, get some input. You know, from when we were going from middle school to high school, we always thought it was scary to go to high school. And then you thought it was scary to go to college, but somehow you did it and you came out of it okay. So you just got to keep doing it. And that's what I tell young people. Just don't be scared. Don't be afraid. Don't let those nerves get over it. You know, just do it.
Yes, just do it, Nike. And there's
Yes, I know I steal it from Nike, but it is what it is.
there's a great Zen Buddhist quote, fall down 7 times, get up 8.
Mm.
And so that's right in line with what your advice is here. Anything else, Layla?
That's everything. Thank
All
you.
right, great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so, so, so much. And thank you, Judge, please. Thank you so much for saying yes. And I look forward to collaborating in the future.
Sounds good. Thank
Okay.
you and have a
Thank
good